Greetings from Seattle, Washington, in the great Pacific Northwest. I'm Jason Rigdon, and you are listening to the podcast of Mystery, the show that always leaves you with more questions than answers, the podcast where I talk with extraordinary guests about the paranormal, the strange, and the unknown. On this episode, I will be talking with sci-fi and horror writers Bonnie, Joe, Stufflebeam, and Preemie Mohamed. I will also be talking with Jane from Shadow Visions Paranormal.
I'm Bonnie Jo Stufflebeam, and I am a science fiction, fantasy, and horror writer. My stories have appeared in over 70 publications. I was on LeVar Burton Reads, or my story was anyway. And I have just been announced as a Nebula Award finalist this year, which is very exciting. It's my second time being nominated.
So this may be a difficult question to answer, but how would you maybe describe your style?
It's kind of very cross genre. So I really love science fiction, fantasy, and horror elements. But I also have always been a writer who struggled with very strictly plotty stories. So I really get into the poetry of a story. I like very literary language. So sometimes, I describe myself as like a literary horror writer or a literary science fiction writer, just to kind of differentiate myself from, Isaac Asimov and some of the classics who didn't really go for pretty language.
And how long have you been a writer?
Well, I've been publishing since 2013. But of course, writing since I was a kid.
Yeah. So it's always been something that's kind of been with you. It's not something that you at some point decided, I need to do this.
Yeah. I was always making little books when I was a kid about my cats and stuff like that.
Yeah. And would you say that most of your work right now is science fiction, or do you delve into kind of more other areas?
Lately, I've really been exploring horror. And part of that is because I've been watching a lot of horror. I was always way too scared to watch horror because it would give me nightmares. But lately, over the past 2 years, I guess, I've been catching up on all the classics, a lot of the 80s horror films. And, like I just watched The Exorcist for the first time. And so I've been writing a lot of horror too at the same time.
Who would you say maybe are some of your kind of, like when you're writing, who do you kind of pull inspiration from? Are there any like kind of go-to people for you?
Yeah. So I really love Kelly Link. Um, she kind of has this very odd way of telling a story. And I wouldn't say that a lot of her stuff is horror, but there's definitely horror elements in there. Often in just like the way that her stories are kind of uncanny and strange things are happening, and you're not really sure why they're happening. And you're kind of unmoored in her worlds because they're kind of like our reality, but they're also very different than our reality, just in the way that logic works. And so I'm really drawn to that style of making things horrific. Um, who else do I read? I read a lot of poets. Lately I've been reading Anne Carson, who has these really cool essays. She's a very academic poet, and so I've been reading a lot of her. Like her translation of Sappho is really cool and something that I've been reading a lot of lately. Who else? Let's see. I don't know. I really like Helen Oyayemi. She does a lot of fairy tale writing, and again, she's not specifically a horror writer, but a lot of her books end up being kind of horror adjacent in some of the things that happen.
And, of all the things you could write, what kind of draws you to sci-fi and horror?
I think it's just I really, really like exploring things that don't or aren't happening in this world. Um, I read a little bit of literary fiction that doesn't have fantastical elements, but For me personally, it's kind of boring. Like, I live in this world, and so I want to explore things that could happen, um, but aren't happening. Like I said, like, sci-fi, I like to explore things that maybe could happen in the future, or horror things that, you know, because I do write fantastical horror. So I'm exploring, ghosts and trolls and goblins and, um, you know, phantoms, stuff that that I don't see happening every day.
At least hopefully not. Hopefully not.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know there are some people who, report ghost sightings and things like that, but that's not me, thank God.
Yeah, well, I have to ask then, this is the podcast of mystery. Have you had any kind of paranormal experiences yourself that you'd like to share?
I haven't really. I mean, I spook myself constantly because
Mhm. Yes.
I feel like so many writers and creative people, we have such overactive imaginations. So there have definitely been times when I have stayed up too late and the house is quiet and I spook myself and then can't sleep. Um, but I wouldn't say that for me, I saw those as paranormal experiences. I more saw them as me just being silly.
Yeah, yeah. So, could you tell me a little bit about maybe what it's like being a sci-fi author in kind of like a sci-fi time, with the internet and our phones and our technology? It's so much different being a writer now than maybe it was even, 20 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. When I write sci-fi, it is definitely the more difficult genre for me to delve into, just because there's so many things to keep track of. Like, there's technology that people are starting to use, and maybe in younger generations that I don't know anything about. So it's I feel like it's very easy to write a sci-fi story and accidentally leave out this huge technology that will probably be present, um, that I'm just unaware of. And so I try to read a lot and do a lot of research when I'm writing a sci-fi story, just to kind of, make sure that I'm not missing anything. I like to read about technologies that maybe are up and coming that people don't realize are up and coming. But still, it's so hard to take every technology that we're currently using and then forecast it, 30 years into the future and include that in a story in a way that doesn't feel like you're overloading the story. So it definitely, sci-fi often feels kind of overwhelming for me. And how I get beyond that is I just try to focus on one very specific thing and not be too broad with my science fiction. Try to focus on one character and how that character is experiencing the world. And um, yeah, that's what works for me.
Yeah, yeah. Talking about, like kind of tech that's on the horizon, like you're saying, upcoming tech, you're trying to keep up on that kind of stuff. Are there any of those technologies that are of particular interest to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm super interested in all of it. I don't always understand all of it. I recently read a whole book, and unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the book, but it was all about technology that is currently, like, we're currently using it, we're currently utilizing it in various fields, um, but it hasn't really entered the public consciousness as much. And let's see, what was in that book. Well, it talked about VR. I'm very interested in VR. I recently wrote actually, it was like a detective mystery story, um, but science fictional, that utilized a VR, gaming system. And, I have not played any of the VR gaming systems, but I'm very interested in where that could go and what people are doing with it. And with that comes implants and cyborgification. I'm very interested in people who are modifying their bodies in those ways. um, So, if I see a headline about about a modern cyborg, I always like to read about what that person has done. Um, Space travel, of course. I'm very interested in space travel, as most sci-fi authors are.
So, it's difficult to talk about because, 2020 was such a difficult time. But, I've been asking a lot of the creative people that come on the show, just how has, this pandemic and 2020 kind of affected your work?
Well, for me, I was already working from home, so I feel like I had less of a transition than a lot of other people. I was actually just writing full time when the pandemic started, um, and so I didn't have trouble transitioning into finding my writing time. Um, I've had kind of a weird pandemic experience. I got divorced at the very beginning of the pandemic, and so I ended up getting a full-time job, which I had not had. I hadn't had a day job in a while. So that was a bit of a transition, but it wasn't super pandemic related. Um, and then recently I started working for a gaming company, and that's interesting because they only started hiring remotely because of the pandemic. So I kind of benefited from 2020 in that way. Um, I feel like for me personally, working hasn't been as much of a struggle just because I think I use my writing as kind of an escape. It's something that I really enjoy, and it kind of, I don't know, it helps my mental health a lot to do writing, and so I've always been pretty good about getting it done. For me, the hardest part has been not seeing friends and family, and so trying to uh, work that work Zoom into my daily life. Yeah.
As a storyteller, do you have any thoughts or opinions about, how we will treat this kind of pandemic in our storytelling in the future? Because I feel like there's two sides when I talk to people. Either one, they don't want to hear anything about the pandemic again in any story. Other people are saying like it's such a big event that you have to include it in your storytelling somehow.
Yeah, I haven't figured that out for myself. I I haven't read a lot of stories recently, that my friends are writing that deal with the pandemic. And I think, like you said, a lot of people just don't want to think about it while we're in it. I feel like it's also, you experience trauma and grief, and then it takes a little while before you're really able to write about it in a way that feels satisfying. And so I think that that might be another reason why I'm not seeing my writing friends put the pandemic into their stories yet. I feel like it's always going to be a mix maybe of people who just kind of want to gloss over, especially since we're sci-fi fantasy writers. We can kind of change the the story of reality however we want. But I think that there definitely should be and could be very interesting stories that take place during these 2 years.
And you live in, like I said, we live in sci-fi times. Um, is it it's so easy for like writers to connect with their fans now. You have social media, websites. You can put up your writing and people can read it like immediately. Like, do you have any thoughts about how like the existence of a writer has changed just because of the internet and the contact with fans?
Yeah. Um, I think that it's changed both for the good and the bad. It is really nice to be able to receive validation so quickly. Like I'll have a story come out and get letters from people or comments or Twitter messages saying how much people appreciated the story or what they really liked about it. And that's really exciting and makes me really eager to keep writing. I've also had messages where people pointed out what they thought was a mistake in the story or, um, what they didn't like about the story, which is a little defeating to have that. I feel like there's always been that feedback, but it's been at a delay because it had to come through the form of letters. Um, and so having that so immediate can feel a little overwhelming at times. I I do like that, writers are held a little more accountable now. So you don't if a writer is out there behaving in a problematic way, um, they're not going to get away with it as long as maybe they used to, which I really appreciate personally.
And I wouldn't be too surprised if, a lot of our listeners are, you know, maybe aspiring writers, people that, maybe they've been thinking about it for a long time, or maybe they're young and they're just thinking about their options. Do you have any advice for people as far as writing goes?
Yeah. Um, I always say that my advice is not to too strictly follow advice. uh, because as a writer who was first starting out, I used to religiously read what other writers were doing and what their processes were. You have a lot of writers, especially in the literary MFA communities, saying you have to write every day, and so I was putting a lot of pressure on myself, and for years, like, my writing was tied into this anxiety. Like, I would feel so anxious until I wrote my words for the day because I had read that that was what true writers were supposed to do. Stephen King never missed a day of writing in his life. um, and so it took a long time for me to uncouple my anxiety and expectations of myself. I feel like a lot of the times writers are our own worst enemies. And so um, I think if you can find what makes you happy about writing and like move towards that, that's what works best for me personally, and not think too hard about like what should I be doing? Um, what are the other writers doing and that sort of thing.
I don't suppose you'd be able to give us maybe a kind of an introduction to some of your favorite stories that you've written, or maybe some of your recent stories to kind of give the listeners kind of a taste of what they'd be in for if they check you out.
Yeah, well, my Nebula nominated novelette, that is about a woman who has experienced a divorce, and it was her fault. She cheated on her wife of 10 years, and there's this technology. It's kind of like an EMDR therapy technology, but it actually lets you live out memories. Kind of like in a dream state. And so she's using this device to try to relive the time she spent with her wife, because she misses her wife, and it's kind of like a last ditch effort to experience that love again. But she ends up rescuing a younger version of herself while she's in the dream state. And so then the two of them, young Robin and older wizened Robin, end up traveling the memories together, and throughout they kind of learn more about one another, and so it becomes more about like a self discovery.
Very interesting. And you said you also have kind of delved into kind of this kind of fantasy horror.
Yeah. Okay. So I had a story recently that came out. I think it came out last year around Halloween, in a magazine called Southwest Review, and it's called Under a Bridge, and it is about a killer troll. um, this woman on the anniversary of her sobriety notices this monster outside, and it looks like a troll, and it is trying to break into the house and basically kill her, and so she has to fight back against this troll.
You said you're, kind of interested in kind of this fantasy world. Was that something, I know a lot of children are very into, fantasy literature and stuff. I mean, adults are too, but there's a certain magic when you're a child reading about these things. Did you kind of have that, if like an interest in kind of that, maybe that fairy world as a child?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, my dad was really into Tolkien, and so he was always telling me he is a kind of Tolkien fan who I think his favorite book is probably The Silmarillion. And so he was always telling me, the vast history of Tolkien. Um, and then I loved fairy tales. My mom was always reading me fairy tales. And I lived on 7 acres in Texas. And so a lot of it was undeveloped. And I used to explore the area around my parents' house. And I made up little fairy worlds. Each area kind of had its name and its history. And I pretended like I saw fairies out in the forest. And, yeah, I was definitely very into the idea of a fairy world.
Do you think that kind of that world you created as a child kind of influences the worlds you create now as an adult?
For sure. I would get very dramatic about it. Like, it wasn't all happy in the fairy world. That was my parents' property. We had betrayals, and we had wars, and it was definitely very, very dramatic. And I think that sense of the dramatic led me to very dramatic fiction that is also fantastical in nature.
Are you considering, your the role of you said about like Tolkien and stuff? Have you ever, or do you have your stories at all connected? That is something that a lot of writers kind of struggle with if they want there to be threads between their stories.
I do. um, and no one has ever really commented on it. But yeah, I do. I have a couple of cities that appear in several stories. Riddle, Texas is one of them, and that's based on the town that I live in now. Um, and the same characters appear over and over again, and they all have very intricate relationships with one another if you follow the thread throughout the stories.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. If people want to learn more about you and your work, where should they go?
I have a website, bonniejoestufflebeam.com, and I am the only Bonnie Joe Stufflebeam. So it's pretty easy to find me if you just put my name into Google. I'm also on Twitter if people want to at me. It's Bonnie Joe Stuffle.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Are you listening to me on your phone right now? Would you please consider sharing this episode on social media, or share a link to this episode with a friend through a text message? The Podcast of Mystery needs your help to grow. If you think this episode is interesting, why not share it with others? Do it now. It's super easy. Almost every single podcast client has some kind of built-in sharing button. Just click that and tell your followers why the Podcast of Mystery is awesome. It doesn't matter how many followers you have. Every share counts. So please do me a favor and share this episode right now on social media.
Hi, my name is Preemie Mohammed. I'm based out of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I'm a scientist and I work for the provincial government, and I'm also a writer. And I write sci-fi, fantasy, horror, things that kind of slide between the categories. And my debut novel, Beneath the Rising, came out in March 2020, straight into the plague. And the sequel is coming out this March, also straight into the plague. And I had a novella come out in February called These Lifeless Things, which is through Solaris Satellites, their new novella imprint. And later in the summer, I have another book coming out with Neon Hemlock called And What Can We Offer You Tonight? And in the fall, I have a book coming out with ECW Press called The Annual Migration of Clouds.
And if you don't mind, would you give us a brief description of, what that first book is maybe about?
Sure. So yeah, Beneath the Rising was my debut. It's and I love the way someone summarized this for me at Dublin Worldcon in 2019. He said it's about a genius, a child prodigy who solves the world's energy problem and creates a bunch more problems. So basically, this new technology attracts the attention of some of Earth's ancient enemies, and they show up very interested to see what's going on, and everything goes downhill from there.
And so you're a scientist. How did you come about starting to write? Was it always something you wanted to do, or was this kind of something you You on spur of the moment decided?
I've always written. I don't conflate writing and publishing. I think the first book I wrote was when I was like 8, and I illustrated it with smelly markers from my dad's drafting supplies. And I think I killed a bunch of brain cells. You know those alcohol markers, like the really thick, big angular ones. Yeah, like the whole booklet just reeked. And it was about a cat, I think, that got kidnapped by pirates or joined a pirate gang or something. I can't remember. Um, yeah, I've always written. It's always been my hobby. It's been my thing, and I never gave it to people to read. I didn't really, because I didn't really see the point. I was talking about this the other day. It was kind of like, well, saying, "Oh, I like to cross stitch. Maybe I should invite people over to watch me cross stitch, and then hand them the finished pieces and stand over them while they look at it and say, 'Do you like it?'" So it to me was just it's my hobby, it's my thing. And a few years ago, a friend sent me an invitation to an anthology and said, this seems like your kind of thing. Or anyway, if it's not the kind of thing you write, I know for sure it's the kind of thing you read. And that turned out to be She Walks in Shadows, the World Fantasy Award winning anthology from 2016, edited by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. So that was really exciting that I got into that and kind of thought, oh, hey, people will pay you for this kind of thing. Maybe I should let people start reading my writing and giving me small amounts of money for it. So that's kind of where that started.
You said that it was kind of similar to the stuff that you're reading. What kind of stuff, are your favorite authors?
Oh, yeah, I think that the friend was just thinking because we had been talking about sort of cosmic horror at the time because I was cleaning up some cosmic horror stuff, and yeah, I grew up reading the pulp or and various horror. I don't know if you can see behind me there on the camera. There's a gigantic collected Edgar Allan Poe that I've had since I was very little, and Edgar Rice Burroughs. I loved all that adventure stuff. Robert E. Howard. Um, a bit older now. I got into Pratchett. I love Terry Pratchett. I love Umberto Eco, William Gibson. Nick Harkaway is probably my favorite author at the moment, or at least the author of my favorite book that hasn't managed to be unseated for the last couple of years. I don't know. I read whatever I can get my hands on, really.
And do you, or how would you kind of categorize your work? Would you call it horror, sci-fi, weird fiction? I know it's such a difficult question.
It was a difficult question. I did not think it would be because when I queried with the novel, I think I put fantasy or maybe dark fantasy in the letter. I thought it was fairly clear that something with monsters and magic was fantasy. And then when it came out, or before it came out, I started seeing it on um, coming in 2020 horror, and then coming in 2020 sci-fi, and then coming in 2020 fantasy. And I thought, oh my God, what did I write? I wrote a monster. I did actually write a monster. It is a fantasy, sci-fi, horror, I guess, alternate history.
Do you have any thoughts about how useful these categories really are? There's like, weird fiction, speculative fiction. Do you think they're actually useful, or do you think they kind of get in the way of creativity and also the readers?
um, yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot recently. Supposedly, we're told that these genre categories are so specific and I guess exclusionary is the word I'm looking for here, because of readers, because marketing tells us, oh, readers don't want any fantasy in their sci-fi, and they don't want any sci-fi in their fantasy, and they don't want any speculative elements in their literary fiction. So we have to make these very, very specific so that readers won't be sad. But in my experience, people aren't purists, not really. Um, they're not that fussed, I think. And you look at something like Star Wars. I mean, at least the good ones are very clearly science fantasy until you start explaining the Force with midichlorians. But anyways, you know what I mean, right? It's I don't really think readers care, and I think with the prevalence of ebooks and audiobooks, it becomes less important to have a book that you can put in one section of a bookstore. Um, And to me, it doesn't fetter or modify my creativity in any way, I've been finding. Since I got into publishing a couple of years ago, I think the process has been I write whatever I want, and then I send it to my poor agent, and he says what category he thinks he should pitch it to somebody as. So I feel like it's very much a them problem, not a me problem.
And being a scientist, how has that kind of influenced your writing?
Hmm. I used to think it didn't. Um, I think that's not correct, though. Not just in the sense that I don't always write science fiction that's very heavy on the science, because I think that was what I was first thinking when I thought, oh, am I being a scientist who writes fiction? Um, I think it's also in the way that I've been taught to and have spent, about 20 years doing to research as well and to organize what I've researched and to find connections between things that look pretty disparate and find a way to incorporate those into fiction. And, uh, you know, data organization does not sound very interesting, but it's something that I do, I guess, easily now after years of experience, and something I genuinely enjoy. I really enjoy doing research for my books. And I have friends who are writers who are kind of like, well, it doesn't come easy to me. I have trouble staying organized. I have trouble looking stuff up. I have trouble finding things, and I have trouble stopping once I've started. I go, yeah, I used to have that too. But the longer you work, the more it kind of gets hammered out of you. So I think it helps my writing process in terms of the way my mind organizes and uses information that's nonfiction in fiction. And that's something I really enjoy. People often ask if my work goes into my fiction. And I think in some cases it probably looks like it. For instance, I work for Alberta Environment, and the novella that I have coming out in September is, I guess, what you call climate fiction. It's set here in my hometown, and it's got a lot of information in about meteorology and the Edmonton River Valley and various species that live there and the types of soils and stuff like that. But I haven't started writing about, I don't know, contaminated sites or gravel pits or anything like that. So some stuff comes in, some stuff doesn't.
And as a creative person, how has kind of this terrible last year affected your writing of the pandemic?
Oh boy. Uh, well, I couldn't read for a really long time. And I don't know if that was caused by uh, the pandemic, but the timing was pretty coincidental if it wasn't. I don't know, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't concentrate, I couldn't remember things. For a long time, I couldn't write, which was good because I had edits to do. So you can still edit when you can't write, thank God. And you can still research when you can't write. But I did have to turn in the Beneath the Rising sequel, A Broken Darkness, that the manuscript in May 2020. So I had to finish with pandemic brain, uh, and I handed it in and just kind of, oh, thank God, I can't believe that happened. And it came back for edits, and I was reading through it going, hey, this isn't bad, but I don't remember writing it at all. Like, who wrote this? I don't remember this. I don't remember this. Who allowed this to happen? That kind of thing. Like, I had just written in such a haze of anxiety and fear. And I think that actually must have shown up in the manuscript, because I don't know how good of a filter I would have been able to have on between me as a person and me as an author during that period. Eventually, I think like a lot of us, I think, picked up enough coping skills to get back to feeling that writing was fun again, was my hobby again, was my buddy again, instead of something antagonistic demanding my time and attention. So that was quite a relief, and then I could read again, so that was good because if I can't read, I can't write. It's like there's nothing in the warehouse to process into fiction.
And did you anticipate a sequel when you wrote your first book?
No. When I wrote the first book, I was actually still in my undergrad. So the book was written, let me think, about 2000 to about 2002. And it's actually set in 2002. And it's funny, sometimes people will contact me and say, wow, this feels really real. You know, they're wearing like the Gap khakis from those commercials back then, and they're using Netscape Navigator. And I'm like, excuse me, I was using Netscape Navigator. Like, at the time it was written, it was not a period piece. I was Nick's age approximately. I was peers with the characters who were 18 and 17 at the start of the book. The reason that I queried with it, seeking out literary representation, basically, was because it was one of the few things that I had that was actually done, that I had written the end on. Because up to that point, I'd been very, very good at starting novels, not super good at finishing them. So yeah, that one went out on submission and came back with a 2-book deal. So the book and a sequel. And I thought, oh, well, I've never written a sequel. But how hard could it be? Turns out really hard. If you've never done something before, learning on the fly on a deadline is not recommended.
Did you have any clues about where you were going to go when maybe you signed this deal, or was just into the wind?
Absolutely into the wind. I had a handful of short story publications by then, but I figured a novel would be a very different beast. And of course, you're going through a literary agent, you're going through a publisher and an editor and a copy editor, and there were all these people involved. And I was like, well, I'm going to roll with it. And if I'm doing a bad job, this suggests to me that somebody out of these like dozens of people will let me know.
I think you mentioned something that's kind of interesting to me about the difficulty of finishing creative works, especially from when I'm talking to people during this time period, during this pandemic, the lockdown and stuff. People have started a million works of art, but so very few have people been able to finish. Do you have any advice for people of like actually finishing these creative projects?
Only the advice I think that probably everybody's giving, which is not helpful. But it's if you lose passion for something, it's probably not the right project for you. It's not that it's not the right time. It's that something about it is off or wrong. And especially with writing, I know a few people who claim that they can power their way through writing something they don't like. The vast majority of us are really jazzed to write what we love, to write what we feel is good or challenging or meaningful or fun. And that kind of propels a work towards the end, even if there are plot problems or life problems or flooding or freezing or you lose power for weeks or whatever. If it's a project that people feel really, really passionate about, if they believe will be satisfying to finish and maybe even has a future, they'll come back to that one and not finish the other ones, I think.
Do you think you'll continue working in this kind of vein of maybe dark fantasy or cosmic horror kind of stuff?
I think so. I think I enjoy its possibilities. I enjoy that this is a playground that feels like it has unlimited equipment to play on, kind of. And in that sense, that's why I really like speculative fiction. I like to read lit fic and I like to read spec fic, but speculative fiction to me is where the really interesting work of the imagination is being done. And that's where I feel most natural writing, I think.
We talked about, these kind of genre definitions and stuff. It doesn't seem like you are bothered by it, or at least you try not to be bothered by it. Do you have any advice for folks that do feel maybe kind of boxed in by kind of these labels that maybe they've put on their work or somebody else has?
I guess in terms of advice, I can't lie and say that people aren't going to get boxed in, because if you're imagining feeling boxed in by a genre label, honestly, you probably are. Somebody in marketing probably intended for you to feel that way. Marketing people are great. They really understand human nature in the sense of how to throw authors off balance enough that we'll agree to practically anything. Bless them, they're very good at their jobs. But I think that the perception of things that have to fit into a neat little box is just, it's stretching, it's fading. I think it's thinning out. And I think honestly, at this point in time, if there's a work that combines sci-fi and fantasy and horror and any other genre, crime, romance, mystery, um, I don't think that's an obstacle for publishers as much as it probably used to be. I did get a bunch of rejections on Beneath the Rising. Really nice ones that said, oh, I loved the book. I read it in 2 days. I have all these compliments about it. I made up a package for it. I took it to acquisitions. Acquisitions said no because they couldn't figure out where to shelve it. But as you can see, it did eventually get a yes. And I do really think that publishers are more willing to say yes to a well-written book in any genre. So truly don't, if this is advice, truly don't mutilate your writing to fit into the box. Don't chop pieces off it. Don't squish it. Don't crunch it. Let it be the best story that you think it can be, and then let the marketing guys worry about it.
So this is a show that talks a bit about the paranormal. I don't know if you'll have an answer for this, but have you, or would you be willing to share any paranormal experiences that you've possibly had? Any strange occurrences? Not everybody's experienced something. Some people have.
Oh, I was about to say, I regret to report that I have not, but I grew up watching The X-Files, so I always wished I had. But actually, a number of years ago, this would have been, I think, 2013 or 14, I was visiting a friend at the local adult psychiatric care facility, which is about 20 clicks from my house. And it's, I hate to use the word haunted asylum. Because lots of it actually now is a much more modern setup, but all the old buildings are still around it, and they're all caution taped off. A lot of them are barricaded off. They're not safe. The stairs aren't safe, that kind of thing. So we were in one of the off limits areas walking around, and in one of the locked up, boarded up buildings. I am basically 100% sure that someone was in there and twitched the white curtain aside to watch us as we walked by. And I nearly had a stroke because I was on edge. Anyway, and the friend I was visiting did not see. So that was, I think, the closest I've had to a paranormal experience. But I'm open to the idea. And if any ghosts want to come say hi and help me write. Thank you.
Why were you in such a creepy place where it was all boarded off?
Oh, we just wanted to go for a walk. And if you stayed on the paths where you were allowed to walk, you'd be done in about 15 minutes. But he had signed out for an hour, and it was a nice day, and we really did not want to go back inside. So we kind of jumped some fences and stuff and went walking around. And I thought, well, it serves me right. I also forgot to mention I wrote a ghost story called The Apple Tree Throne, and I haven't got the cover, but I can show you here the audio version. That was hilarious. I thought they were going to send me a code for like the download for the copies in my contract, and instead I got an envelope with CDs in it.
Oh, wow.
Like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Where can I play this?
Yes.
But there's two main characters in that, and one of them is, yes, a ghost.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, the paranormal does influence you or at least influence you in some way, story wise. Maybe not. I'm not saying ghosts influence you.
There's a lot of X-Files references in Beneath the Rising and the sequel, because there is absolutely one character who sees himself as Mulder and one who sees himself as Scully. and they both don't realize that the other person thinks the other person is
Yeah. Yeah.
the wrong person. So they realize that in the second book, and they argue about it.
Have you tried now going back to rewatch the X-Files? I've started dipping into that myself.
I do want to do an X-Files rewatch. Actually, a friend and I have been talking about it because I bought the series, and back in the day, I watched it up to the end of, let me think, season 6,
Okay.
I think, or maybe season 7, where they lost Mulder.
Yeah, I think that's where
And then I think
stopped.
I stopped.
Yeah.
And then I watched the series finale of like the original one, which I think was season, I want to say 10. 9 or 10, and for some reason, very confident that I would be able to figure out what was going on, and I understood nothing. I'm sitting there like, who's that guy? Who's that guy?
Yeah.
Hey, what are they doing? Hey, why are they here? Why is there a baby? Like, what's happening? Just had no idea. I thought, okay, mistakes were made. I will do a rewatch at some point.
Yeah. I've been watching like a lot of older TV, especially, like science fiction stuff. And what's really interesting about the X-Files is just how well it looks considering how old it is. Like it's...
Yeah, I remember looking at like stills and stuff of some of the episodes and thinking, okay, well, the fashion, little dated. The hair and makeup, little dated. Cell phones, my God, they're so giant. But I thought a lot of the creature effects and stuff were really good. I thought a lot of the sets were really good. And I'm sure that some of those Monster of the Week ones will give me nightmares again, because I can assure you that Fluke Man gave me nightmares for like years.
Yes.
When I was, whatever it was, like 12 or 13.
Yeah, the fashion is interesting because I watched the first couple episodes, and you can see that, it was kind of, I think they skimped on the wardrobe at first, because both Scully and Mulder have just very ill-fitting outfits. That you can see that it's not right.
Yeah, no, and Mulder's in like the same 2 suits for like 3 seasons, and you're like, oh, is the government not paying you? I'm sorry, Mulder.
Well, I've really enjoyed talking with you today. If people want to learn more about you and your books, where should they go?
They should go to my website, which I try to keep updated, and that's at www.preemiemohammed.com, so just my name. I can send you the link if you want to put it in show notes or whatever. And I'm pretty active on Twitter, at Preemiesaurus, and less active on Instagram because I keep forgetting that I have it.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really encourage listeners to go check out the books. So yeah, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Jason. This was awesome.
Are you following the podcast of Mystery on social media? We are at Pod of Mystery on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Following this show on social media is a quick and free way that you can help this show grow. Once again, we are at Pod of Mystery on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Every follow helps this show grow. Please consider following the Podcast of Mystery on social media.
So I'm Jane. I'm an Australian-based solo paranormal investigator. I have a YouTube channel. You can just search up Shadow Visions Paranormal. I've been investigating since 2006. I took a bit of a break, but I was still investigating on and off as a hobby. And then end of last year, I decided to come back and take it very seriously. And it's been investigating and filming my adventures ever since.
And did I get that right? You're a solo investigator.
Yes, I'm a solo investigator. So it's been interesting doing it by myself. And the reason, like, obviously, one of the number one rules is you don't investigate by yourself. But the reason I am is I spent previous to returning to investigating and starting YouTube, I spent a good 12 months trying to find people to join me. But every time I reached out, I just struggled to find either the right people or it just didn't happen. And I was getting really over just putting off going out there because I didn't have people to join me. So I just went, you know what, I just need to get out there. You know, the investigation bug was biting really hard, and, you know, I had equipment sitting there and I just wanted to get out. So I just went, you know what, I'm going to break that number one rule. And, you know, I'm a pretty switched on, you know, wise girl and, having lots of previous experience, I just went, you know what, I'm just going to do it. So, but at the moment, it's quite good. I'm based on the Gold Coast in Queensland. But I have a good friend, Peter, from Ethereal Sisters Paranormal, who's also a YouTube investigator. She invited me to come over to the other side of Australia. She lives in Perth, Western Australia, and I'm in collabing with her at the moment. So I'm not solo at the moment. We're working together. So yeah, it's quite interesting to be back working with someone else. So it's quite good.
So how did this start? How did you start doing these investigations?
Well, back in 2006, I've always been drawn to the paranormal. I've been having experiences with spirit and paranormal occurrences since a very young child. I actually grew up in a haunted pub that my parents and my grandparents had a lease on in Sydney. So obviously very drawn to everything paranormal and, obviously the event of, shows coming on television and things like that. And I was like, you know what, I really want to do this for myself because I had so many unanswered questions from my own experiences. So with social media, I found there was groups and there was a local group in Brisbane that put the call out for people to come and join their team. So I contacted them at the time and said, hey, I would love to come on an investigation. And yeah, got on really well with those guys. So I just started investigating with them and just loved it. I just felt like I was totally in my element. Yeah. Investigated with them for quite a long while and eventually we disbanded and unfortunately, that was a little disappointing. But like I said, even though I was no longer doing it with them, I'd still visit historical places, just in my general life, and holidaying, and I would still be there, just doing my own little sort of hobby investigations, taking photographs, and seeing what I could pick up. If I could pick up any evidence photographically, and I'm also a psychic medium. Which I've discovered in more recent times, but I always knew I had psychic abilities. So, I'd often try and tune in as well. So quite an interesting little journey. So, yeah.
Did you have the psychic abilities when you were a child too? Was that why the spirits maybe were interacting with you?
Yes. I was very aware as a very young child. I was very different. I thought as I grew older, I always thought I was just one of those children with a very overactive imagination. But looking back now, I know that it was more than that. And, as I was one of those children that never lost my ability, as I grew older, it never went away and it just kept increasing and increasing. So it got to a point that I think it was around 4 years ago that it got so strong that I thought I was going crazy. So I was like, I need, and I was having more and more, intense experiences. And I went, I need to get some help with this. So I reached out to another psychic medium that's well known here in Australia. And she runs mentoring programs. And I reached out to her and, joined one of her programs. And, so I could learn to sort of harness and learn how to open and close myself. And so that was a really good way for me to sort of go, no, I'm not crazy. And then look back in hindsight and go, wow. So there is all these correlations, connections between the experiences I had and the build up. And, this has all been part of my journey. And my purpose here is communicating with spirit and bringing the truth to people that there is, existence after we pass on from this life to the next.
I've been contacted by a couple people who, were kind of wondering about, their abilities and things happening to them. Do you have any advice for folks that are kind of looking for, like, maybe the mentoring relationship that maybe you found?
I spent quite some time just looking at different psychic mediums, watching YouTube, obviously, but searching Facebook and social media. And it was really just feeling who I was drawn to. If I was looking, if you're looking for someone to mentor you, you really need to be comfortable and feel drawn to that person, like, and they need to be sort of resonate on the same sort of energy level as you. And obviously, it's a practice what you preach kind of mentality. Like, if someone's preaching something to you that doesn't feel right, then it's probably not the best person for you. And it doesn't matter whether you want to guide yourself through the process or you want someone to guide you through the process. You've just got to make sure that the whole process feels right. So, there's plenty of great channels on YouTube that you can use for self-guidance, but yeah, you just can't take everything as what I call church, that everything you're hearing or seeing is the correct way for you. You just always want to just keep tuning into yourself and go, okay, does this feel like the right direction for me? That's the one thing, really listen to yourself. And because everyone, as far as psychic mediums, have different ways of doing things, and there are people out there. When I was looking, I was like, no, I don't see myself doing that, or that's, it's not about so much putting yourself out of your comfort zone. It's just like that's not within my spiritual belief system. It was, yeah. So it's really, looking at your belief system, but also, what your gut feeling tells you about these people, and what their practice is, and what they're doing. Because unfortunately, in the world of psychics, there are a lot of charlatans out there, and there is what we call the cult mentality, and they're just out there preaching a lot of garbage just to make money. So you do have to be very wary, and the only way to be wary of that is to really, be listening to yourself and following your gut instinct. So yeah, so you're not being taken advantage of along the way. That's really important as
And so when you're going out and investigating one of these places, um, do you bring any kind of like electronic equipment with you, or do you depend on kind of your maybe extrasensory perception?
Oh, most definitely. I've always been very big on, even though being a medium, I still stay very grounded in reality when I'm investigating, and rely a lot on my equipment because, one, I don't like to go into an investigation completely open psychically, because that leaves you available for psychic attack or spiritual attack or attachment. And as well as if I'm, seeing or feeling or hearing things and getting, psychic downloads, equipment then, allows me to get that extra, correlation that what I'm psychically perceiving is correct. So, using those extra bits of equipment to back up, because I can, film on my video. Oh, I just saw this, or, I've just received this message, or I'm feeling this, or I'm getting drawn towards this area, But if I'm just saying that, then the viewer will be like, well, how do we know that? You're just saying that. Whereas if, I'm running my, whether it's I'm using the Paralys, or I'm using the Necrophonic app, or I'm running my SB7 Spirit Box, or the K2 meter, or whatever it is, a REM pod, and then I'm getting hits on these things that are backing up what I'm then, saying I'm receiving psychically, then, that's just undisputable evidence in itself. But then there's also, you know, the tradition of the paranormal community is that you need to be getting that, electronic or scientific evidence for them to be like, okay, yeah, there's definitely activity there. Yeah, very big, very big on loving I love my equipment. So yeah, very big on that.
Yeah, yeah. And at what point did you decide to start the YouTube channel?
That would have been around, I think, September last year. I don't, yeah, it all happened really quickly. I'm also like, I read tarot cards, and I was petering on Instagram reading tarot, but it just sort of wasn't heading in the direction I wanted to. And I was struggling, and I was doing a bit of soul searching, and I was thinking of doing tarot on YouTube, but it just didn't feel right. And I think it was because I was resisting what I was really meant to be doing. And just one day I was sitting there and I went, why am I not doing paranormal? I've been sitting here for so long trying to get it happening. Like, why am I not bringing what I love and what I really want to do out to the world? Like, how silly it was. And then just overnight, I woke up one morning and I just had this huge urge and drive to just make it all happen. And I woke up and I just started the YouTube channel, like signed it all up. And within 20 minutes, I had my name and it meant something to me. And then I just, it's not the logo I have now, but I had a logo and I'd done a branding course previously to do with when I was doing my tarot. And then, yeah, just got the brand up and running and just announced because I was already part of the paranormal community I'm part of now, but I was a viewer. And I said, hey, guys, I've started a channel. And it all happened within a day. And I haven't looked back since.
Yeah, it just shows the fantastic power we have nowadays of, between starting a podcast or a YouTube channel. Not that long ago, that would have been unimaginable that you have like basically a TV show, and you have all the power.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I think, if you're really passionate about something and you really have that drive, that's the thing. You can just make it happen, overnight, literally. It's just, you've got to want it.
Yes.
So, yeah. And once you find, if you find your sense of direction, you can just run with it. And that's so great. Back when I first started, that wasn't possible. We were sharing things on Facebook in its early days. But yeah, to have that now, I was like, yeah, it's great. And I'm loving it so much.
So what have been some of your favorite investigations? If that's an appropriate term, I don't know if that's okay. A favorite, is that right?
No, that's fun.
Okay.
So some of my favorite investigations would be I do a lot of cemeteries because obviously they're historic cemeteries are one of my favorites because they have wonderful stories to tell, obviously. So back home, I did Toowong Cemetery, my local cemetery, and South Brisbane. So Toowong's Brisbane's oldest cemetery. And it has this really creepy section that just has this strange vibe. And I'd heard stories about from many different people, and it's also written in a well-known book on the area by a man called Jack Sims. And it's about that satanic rituals had been taken place for many years in this cemetery. And I'd always been drawn to this one area and I always had a sense that if the stories were true, it was probably in this area. So I went in and investigated, and I actually got, through the spirit box and necrophonic app, correlating evidence that I was in the right area and that these events did actually occur. So, and that's a very active cemetery as well, all around. The necrophonic just, doesn't stop talking. The spirit box just constantly, you're getting voices through it all the time. Hits on the K2 meter. It's, it's like a paranormal investigator's dream, that cemetery. It's fantastic. And then South Brisbane is also another cemetery that's historic. I think it's the second oldest cemetery in Brisbane, and it's just got a really intense energy. Like you just walk into that cemetery and you just get hit with a wall of energy. And it's got some interesting burials there. It's got of plague victims. It's got the Bogger Road Jail, which is just near that. That's an historic jail in Brisbane. It's got the inmates that were hung on the gallows buried there as well. So I made some contact with them, and I made a mistake on listing how many of them are buried there in the unmarked graves, and they corrected me during that investigation through the spirit box. So yeah, that was interesting. And then my local cemetery, I'd heard some stories about that place, but I was a bit here and there about believing the stories. And that was the first investigation when I started my channel, I went and did. And that place did not disappoint. I've been grabbed on the arm there. I saw the apparition of a ghost dog. It has an intense energy, and it's another place where the spirit box just does not stop talking at you. The K2 just in this one section just does not stop. Yeah, it's hectic. So yeah, that was a surprising place. So yeah, they're probably like the top three, I would say, of what I've done so far. So, but there's been some good places I've visited here in Perth so far.
I have to, yeah, I have to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to say too much.
Yes,
because
yeah,
I've still
yeah.
got content coming as far as my locations here. So yeah, I haven't released those videos yet.
I have to ask about the ghost dog. Do you think that was like I guess a human ghost in the form of a dog, or was this actually like maybe a pet spirit? I heard stories about like pet ghosts. Maybe, I'm not sure what the order of that is, but like where your pet dies and there is kind of like a ghost there.
Okay, so in the section where I was, which is like the most active section where I tend to investigate the most, I've been visited during the day, and there's actually pet bowls on a couple of the top of the grave. So what I believe is that possibly either the deceased person's pet has since passed on and the ashes have been spread there, or the person was buried with their deceased pet. So I do believe it to be an actual apparition of someone's pet dog. And also, I've had on 2 different investigations at that location, I had dog come through a couple of times on the spirit box. I also had a dog's bark on that same investigation where I saw the apparition. I had a dog's bark come through just before I saw it on the spirit box. So, yeah, there is evidence backing up the fact that I do believe it to be someone's pet that is possibly, buried with them, or the ashes has been scattered on their grave there.
Yeah, that fascinates me because I remember hearing stories about ghosts having companion animal ghosts with them, and that always seems like a very interesting thing because the bond is so strong that it even goes beyond life.
Yes, I definitely think so as well. And yeah, it would not surprise me at all because being a pet owner myself, yeah, I'm a pet mama. So, my bond with my animals has always been super strong. So, yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. And in doing, mediumship readings, you will often get pets that come through as well. So, yeah, without a doubt.
And do people ever ask you to come into their homes to kind of investigate phenomenon that they may be experiencing there?
We don't get that too much here in Australia. Me and Peter believe that's one for a couple of different reasons. First of all, we're not as old a country as, say, America is. We don't have the deep set history, especially the tragic history. We don't have, like Civil War history. We don't, have the tragic history of Indigenous people past. Any sites that are of tragic history like that are designated historical sites and nothing's been built on them. To Australian people's mentality and attitude towards the paranormal isn't as open as, say, American people. I think if things were happening in some people's house, they'd probably just write it off as, oh, it's just the house or a load of crap, or, just, yeah, not be like, oh my God, we have a ghost, like something's going on, or, there's a demon in my house. So it just, yeah, so the paranormal, like, while, there probably is paranormal occurrences happening in people's home, they're either just not so open to it, or, it doesn't happen as often as, you may find in countries like America, or, in countries in Europe or the UK. So, yeah, unfortunately, we don't really get that many calls to visit people's homes. It would be great. I would love that. Yeah, but unfortunately, yeah, we haven't had that yet. partner's listening that's in Australia, and you want us to come and investigate, we quite happily would.
And when you were doing this kind of solo, did you have any kind of close calls or maybe times when maybe you had to kind of retreat?
I had a couple, yes, but it wasn't really to do with the paranormal. It was more personal safety of humankind. So yeah, I was out investigating and I thought I saw a shadow person and just I got the sense and feeling that there was someone lurking around, but it wasn't of the paranormal kind. And then I sort of stopped everything and I was like, that wasn't the shadow of spirit. That was definitely the shadow of a person. And yeah, I packed my stuff up and exited the location very quickly. And when I got home, upon reviewing my evidence, because I had the spirit box running and I couldn't quite hear it because I was in an echoey area out, near bushland. When I got home and reviewed my evidence, the spirits were actually telling me, lady, stop, please go. Yes. They were basically telling me, you need to stop, and it said, leave, go, please stop. And I was blown away when I got home. They knew, and they were telling me, obviously, intelligent spirits that were there with me, that there was someone lurking around and that I wasn't very safe and I needed to go. I just obviously couldn't hear them at the time properly. Yeah, so I was actually blown away. So my feeling of that, it was the shadow of a person, a real person, and that I, felt someone lurking around. Correct. So that was kind of a bit eerie. And then there's been other times where I've been just testing locations during the day, and there's been untoward people hanging around. That I get people who are interested and just look from afar, but then I've had untoward people in some areas, and I've for my own safety. Yeah. So I've always kind of I'm doing my investigation, but I still I'm always very aware of keeping an eye on my surrounds at the same time, even that whether it's day or night.
Yeah. And you're out there doing these investigations and you're also, I believe, filming it for your YouTube channel. Is that like an extra burden? Is that more difficult or is it just one more electronic device going?
Um, it is hard. Sometimes I wish I had 5 sets of hands, obviously, but it's just a case of keeping my video rig quite minimal and light. And I've learned to sort of adapt to, what I carry. My camera bag's quite small and, I've just learned to adapt. So it isn't so much a burden. It's just I've had to learn to work in different ways than, your average YouTuber that has a cameraman, or I would love a camera person. It would be so handy, but unfortunately I don't. So, I'm lucky I'm quite the adaptable woman. So I just, I've learned to adapt. And yes, if I haven't needed to use the tripod for filming yet because I prefer the experience of allowing my viewer to be mobile with me. And I think it just adds to that sense of adventure with that vlog style filming. Yeah, so there's lots of little ways I have to sort of carry things on me, and the waistband of my pants is often very handy for holding things. That's all I'll say.
So how many videos do you think you have up there right now?
At the moment, I've got 8 videos in my season 1, and then I've got Roundhouse, which I released 2 weeks ago, and then another extra video. So that's 10 plus then I've got my live streams. So yeah, not the hugest catalogue of videos at the moment, but I'm about to start a raw footage edit series. So that's some of the investigations that I did that work. Did get evidence, but it's just not as exciting as my usual investigations that I would turn into a full video. So yeah, just while I'm waiting to release season 2. Yeah, so I started editing the first one of that series yesterday. That'll be coming out hopefully on Sunday.
Do you have any favorite videos that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Let me see. I probably do. Just my favorite video would be my investigation at Tumblegum Historic Cemetery. That's the last video in my season one. That place was just insane. It did not stop. You will, if you watch the video, you'll see it's very disorientating. I got disembodied moans. I got footsteps happening. I've got hits on my SP7 spirit box of the graves that are there. It's a creepy old cemetery in the middle of the bush. It's extremely isolated. You just need to watch it. Yeah.
And do you have like a list of maybe places near you or just in Australia that you would like kind of maybe like a wish list of places you'd like to visit?
Oh, so many. So Peter and I are trying to get to the Fremantle prison. That's the most haunted location here in Perth. So that's the goal while I'm over here. There's the old Melbourne jail. There's Picton Tunnels in Sydney. There would be Wagga Road Jail in Brisbane. Oh, there's just so many. There's fantastic locations. I grew up in Sydney, so there's fantastic locations all through Sydney because, that's obviously the first city that was established in Australia, so it just has fantastic history. And I don't know, there's just so many to name. I could be here all day.
I think you mentioned something I'm not familiar with. Was it a necro box?
Oh, the necrophonic cat.
Oh, yeah. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the necrophonic app is basically it works like the SB7 spirit box. So it scans through. So it's basically like Nick Ross, the Geo box, I believe it's called. So basically what it does, it has a loop programmed into it and it scans through that and basically it triggers spirit like through a white noise. It has you can put reverb through it and spirit use it to communicate with spirit rather than scanning through the radio frequencies like an SP7 spirit box does. It scans through that loop. Just works. Yeah, it's the same, but a little differently. I'm not so technical.
Yeah.
I'm not the most technical person.
Yeah, no. I just in case I wasn't familiar with it, I thought I should ask just in case it is something, something completely new I've never heard of.
It is a paid app, but you download it on iPhone and for Android.
Yeah, and so one more question. There's a lot of people who, would like to kind of do these kind of paranormal investigations. Do you have any advice for somebody who's just sitting at home? Maybe they're listening to us right now, and they keep on thinking, I want to do this. I want to do this.
Basically, just do it. You don't have to start big. Basically, to start paranormal investigating, if you have a smartphone, you have pretty much all you need there. You've got you have your camera, to film or take photos. You have a fantastic digital voice recorder within your phones. They are highly sensitive. They are great for doing EVP recordings. You can download your apps such as your Paralysis app. If you have an iPhone, you've got the new Ovilus app. You've got, Necrophonic app. It's a go-to tool. Then you can just you can buy a flashlight. Obviously, don't go by yourself. If you're new to it and you don't have experience, please take someone with you for safety reasons. Not just spiritually, but obviously, you don't want to be getting stuck somewhere or fall and not be able to call for help or have someone go and fetch help for you. But yeah, just do it. Don't even hesitate. If you're not sure where to start, there's plenty of channels that do give you hints, tips and tricks on how to get started. You don't need all the big fancy equipment. Just start small and just get out there. Give it a go. You might not get evidence the first time you get out there, but by the next location, just keep trying. That's the paranormal. You're not going to get evidence everywhere you go. Don't get disheartened. Just keep going.
So if people want to learn more about you and your work, where should they go?
I have, you can follow me on social media at instagram.com/shadowvisions paranormal and also facebook.com/shadowvisions paranormal.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I really encourage people to check out your work. It's pretty fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much. Pleasure to have me on.
I'm Jason Rigdon, and you have been listening to episode number 14 of the Podcast of Mystery. Originally transmitted on Friday, May 21st, 2021. If you want more information about me, the show, or my guests, please visit podcastofmystery.com. Tune in next Monday morning when I will be talking with author Chaz of the Dead about his investigations into the Friendship Group, a mysterious group that might be aliens, Nazis, or maybe just folklore. If you have a guest or a topic that you would like to hear on this show, please email podofmystery@gmail.com. You can also send any feedback or comments to that same address. This audio program has been copyrighted by me, Jason Rigdon, in 2021 and is freely available under the Creative Commons Attribution License.